It is every police leader's responsibility to not only continually develop their own skills and abilities, but to prepare the next generation of leaders. Retired Captain William Frost helps you meet this task by providing a clear blueprint to follow in his book, Leadership in Law Enforcement. To learn more about his book and other consulting and training he provides, go to www.code33consulting.com. That's code33consulting.com. This episode is sponsored by Hero Schedule. If your department needs better scheduling software that isn't outdated, clunky, and expensive, Hero Schedule is an easy switch. It's $4 per user per month, and they give you a free 30-day trial. Get started at heroschedule.com and click on Try Hero Schedule. Sometimes you have uncomfortable conversations. Sometimes you're telling someone when they're not doing great, when they are expected to do better. And is that not our role to help our people do better? Is that not one of the primary functions? I'm like, yeah, absolutely, right?
Yeah, and in having that as part of our sort of culture, when I say culture, organizational culture, professional culture, I don't think that was part of our culture. As we talk more, and when I say we, I mean chiefs and sheriffs, as we talk more about wellness and focusing on that and supporting that, we're not always demonstrating it. We're not always living it. We're not always, I would almost say living it ourselves. When an officer is working for a command staff or a chief or a sheriff who is saying one thing, doing another, and I've certainly been in that situation myself as a patrol officer, I mean, you see right through it.
The views and opinions expressed by the host and guests of this show do not represent their employing agency, department, or organization. All information should be regarded as anecdotal, contextual, and educational, and should not be misinterpreted as legal or medical advice. Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Blue Grit Radio. This is your host, Eric, and today I'm joined by a past supervisor. We call him supervisor in a very loose way because he was like the supervisor for me as I came into police work. But that is former chief, former undersheriff, current executive director of WASPC, and we'll get into that and what that means for people that aren't from the region. But Steve Strachan, thank you so much for coming on the show, sir.
Eric, it is great to be with you. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I gave a nod to you, well, thanks for hiring me, by the way, because you helped me along in my journey of being in law enforcement.
I was going to mention, when I look back on my career, at least there's one thing I can say was successful. I hired Eric Tung. So
yeah, right. Take credit for that. Who needs anything else? Certainly, like out of the litany of things that you've done, that has to be at the top. And here we are at the culmination of kind of revisiting that. We're going to talk about that for about an hour, right?
That's right. Let's talk about your hiring process. Mm-hmm. I will tell you this. I remember you were interested in going to another agency that was a quiet little town, and I talked you out of it. I said, stay in Kent. It's a great place to grow with, and to see the things you've done has been very cool. So seeing from the outside.
Yeah, I wouldn't do it any other way. My first offer, as I shared before, especially with hiring types of episodes, was a small, quiet town. And I knew that was not the road, but rival, friendly neighbor was the other one that was racing. And we see that now more than ever, agencies racing for these candidates. So very playfully, but yeah, I have a lot of friends and colleagues at all of our neighbors. So that's been really a fantastic thing. It's not just your PD, it's like the greater community as well.
Yes. And frankly, seeing that becoming a greater emphasis in terms of, hey, we're all in this together, not only in a positive way, but also to kind of check on each other and also to call on each other a little bit.
Yeah.
Again, from outside, I've been seeing you foster that. That's huge. And I want to thank you for that.
No, thank you. It's, as I said before, I'm doing what I've seen and what I felt done for me and for the people that, that we're following. If I'm able to kind of put a different lens or maybe a different microphone, literally, but, using social media and kind of, I suppose, like giving it to a different, broader audience, because people have been doing this work for a long time, right? Like peer support's not a new thing. Encouraging wellness is not a new thing, but if other people in the space and a lot of the executive leaders today, and we were talking about this a little bit before the recording started, but if they are bringing it up to the forefront in a newer way, then that's fantastic. Then, people of my generation can just take that torch and lead it on. And I know everyone that's coming up, like all the young sergeants out there or the people getting hiring today, like I'm excited about what they're going to be able to accomplish in their career, because I'm sure that even the active cops now, when they get to retirement, I'm sure that in some ways they're going to be like, man, what they're doing now for new hires, I wish I had that. And it would have been so much more beneficial.
100%. And I'm going to sound a little bit like the old get off my lawn guy, but I mean, I go back to believe it or not, the late 80s is when I started. I was
Hmm.
22. And what you just said is so on point, where, I've been fortunate in so many ways, in some of those little forks in the road along the way, and the mentors I've had and the coaches I've had. But so many of the things I've seen from both line level folks and leadership in the last few years, especially, and I'm talking about checking on each other and checking each other as well, is we keep learning all the time. I had a sheriff talk to me a while back about developing a culture within their agency where when somebody is doing something clearly wrong, and it's written into statute now as, duty to intervene, and this
Hmm.
expectation from, the outside that, the thin blue line, and we all cover for each other, and we do the wrong things and we cover it up. And he's saying, no, 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 the confidence to step in and say, that's not right, or you're going the wrong direction here, either on an incident or just in terms of behavior and the way people
Yeah.
are living, and the willingness to do that. I didn't see that when I started as much. And that has been among the many things that I wish that we would have had more of then. And
Hmm.
as many things as we complain about today, so many of those things are so much better. And of course, we have a lot yet to improve.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so much to that, right? There's the check, as you said it,
Mhm.
right? And it's that accountability piece, which isn't just like when people are way out of line. It's the little things too. It's that true pure, like, hey, like who can call me out better than the people that know me and care about me the most, right? They're gonna see when
Yes.
something is not right. They're also gonna see when I'm not being my best self, right? Whether it's
Mhm.
calling out or calling up. I like that kind
Yep.
of twist on things, but really you think about supervisory type of roles, and I
Mhm.
think that one of the ways that I've heard it best described is like sometimes you have uncomfortable conversations, sometimes you're telling someone when they're not doing great, when they are expected to do better. And is that not our role to help our people do better? Is that not one of the primary functions? I'm like, yeah, absolutely, right.
Yeah, and having that as part of our sort of culture, when I say culture, organizational culture, professional culture, I, I don't think that was part of our culture when I was a 25-year-old officer, and I wish it were. And I'm thinking as you're talking, Eric, about people that I wish I would have had more of a mind to do what you just described, to step in and say, hey, I see this happening, and I see you going in a direction that isn't so good, whether it be at work or just in their lives. And things didn't go so well. And again, I think we're getting better at that. But the fact that we are all talking more about it is a really good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not shy about saying, as far as like me being a new officer, a lot of what I share is because I didn't have the best outlook on how I was managing the career. I didn't have the best, I suppose, reflections on how I was interacting with people on the street. And part of that was me. Like a huge part of that
Mhm.
was me. I was deciding how I want to do that.
Yeah.
And you could blame culture and all these things, but I think we are all part of the whole. And that's what
Yeah.
really impresses me when I see a lot of really young or new, I don't mean like actually age wise, but just newer officers. And very quickly, you can see some people and exactly like what they stand for and how they stand for it,
Yeah.
how they don't back down for challenge, how they put everyone in front of themselves. And there is a too much, right? When we talk about wellness
Yep.
too, but it makes me so excited and inspired when I see people that they didn't need someone like a culture to kind of say, hey, this is what you should do or what you ought to think about. They're just in it, right? And I think that's a lot could be said for hiring the right people when you can suss that out.
Hiring the right people. And then, one of the things I've heard you talk about this, and I like to think we talk about this a lot at the Sheriffs and Chiefs Association. I certainly haven't always succeeded, but we've tried to talk about, is your agency providing an environment that is reinforcing what you just described? It's
Mm,
reinforcing people checking on each other, reinforcing holding each other responsible, and not just relying on an organizational structure. I always think, having done this now, gosh, almost 40 years, we have this paramilitary structure where we have uniforms and ranks and all that kind of thing. And so it's built in that way, and we're used to it, but it's an incredibly independent job. Law enforcement officer spends almost all of their time by themselves, solving
mhm.
problems by themselves with individuals who are often having their worst day. We do it all by ourselves, and we're kind of making it up. I mean, that's how I always felt. I'm just a human being trying to figure out problems with another human being.
Yeah.
And you're alone there making decisions. And in this paramilitary structure, that doesn't give you a lot of guidance. What gives you guidance is your culture and your attitude and the way you treat people and your ethics. And again, these are all shiny words, but it has everything to do with how you're treated at work, how you're doing at home, how you're going into work, how you're approaching each call, how much decompression time you get. And the fact that we're so much more deliberate about that and talking about that and paying attention to that instead of just letting it happen, which is what I saw for a lot of years in my career. And it's just been a huge improvement. I don't think we talk about it enough.
Yeah, you're right. And I think that you give the listeners a lot to think about, like individually with the day-to-day progression of their own schedule, but then also how do you interact with those around you? Maybe you feel like you have recognized the value of these things like decompression and self-care and all the different modalities there, work-life balance or the illusion of, but how you maintain or build upon that. I just came from speaking at a conference in Orlando, which was a Second Alarm Project. It was largely firefighters. And so with that, a lot of conversations were kind of the differences in how fire is doing categorically really well in this all things wellness, right? And we could take it back to like the OGs of working out on duty because they live there, right? But also, pickleball and family style dinners, but they are built that way. And I throw shade playfully, but they're doing a lot of things that we can't be the same. It's not apples to apples, but we could learn a lot and get inspired by those things. But as you said, something you said, Steve, was that, it's a very solitary job. And even in more metropolitan areas, maybe you go to calls with more than one officer commonly. But if you want a recluse, if you want to like hide, it's so easy, right? Like if I want to go to my call, say, hey, cool, I'll catch up with you later. I'm going to go type. I can find some dark space. I can go behind a warehouse, right? I can really avoid my own team. And so that makes it a challenge. Whereas fire, you cannot do that. Like you live with these guys and gals, and that's good, right? So after a traumatic call, you have to go back to the station before the next one. And generally, you're not just going to the next one and the next one and the next one. It's just designed a different way. Whereas police, all the cops listening in can recognize how it is simply not the same.
It pains me in my heart to have to admit that firefighters do some things way better than us, but you're 100% right. And there's much we have to learn from firefighting in terms of their attention to emotional wellness, physical wellness, supporting each other, and that together time. And they pay deliberate attention to decompression. I'm going to draw this back for a second. In my current job, we deal a lot with politics and the legislature and staffing and getting money and those kinds of things. But I'm always talking about wellness and particularly decompression time. When I was a patrol officer many years ago, I worked in a town where we were very rarely stacked up call to call, not very often. So there was almost always decompression time. You meet with somebody and, it's kind of BSing. That's how we viewed it. But it was incredibly necessary to talk through what I experienced, how I experienced it, how it affected me. And even if we didn't consciously know that that's what we were doing, of course, that's what we were doing. Firefighting has that built in, and they're really good at that. And, again, in my current position, we're talking a lot about staffing and better support for staffing. And it isn't just throwing more cops against the wall. It isn't just, more officers to show up for 911 calls. It's to do it the right way and to do it with the right approach. And again, all these things are related. Having been a chief and a sheriff for as many years as I was, I continue to learn, and it's reinforcing to me how culture and personal wellness and discipline, in other words, things I identified or the organization identified as discipline problems, were in fact wellness problems or cultural, or, this crew with this sergeant seemed to have constant problems with this or this or this that I identified as discipline. Well, what was it really? It was culture. It was leadership. It was sometimes wellness. They weren't taking care of each other. They weren't checking on each other. And so all those, what I'm trying to say is things are way more connected than it's taken me this long to figure out and to start to put it together. I still haven't figured it out, by the way.
It's a work in progress.
I'm learning, and I think chiefs and sheriffs are learning from each other that the more that we see how connected these things are, the more we can approach them, I'll use the phrase holistically,
Mm-hmm.
and the better outcomes we're going to get for our people.
Yeah, and I think when you say holistically, it is like everything's involved and everything is connected. And not to get too woo, but I've been nerding out on some philosophy lately, but it's kind of like
Mhm.
that Zen, right? Like where
Mhm.
it doesn't have to be good or bad in a vacuum. It's
Yep.
not all absolutes. And we could look at our job that way in a healthy way too. But, as a younger man, I tried to understand things through extremes and absolutes. This
Yep.
is right. This is wrong. This is good.
Yep.
This is bad. However, as you're saying, I don't think anyone can truly point at someone that is misstepping repeatedly. And if you peel back the curtain, or maybe it's overt, you're going to see things that make you concerned about their wellness, right? Their health. It's not to throw shade or blame, but it's, yeah, things are not going great. Maybe you know about his or her home life. Maybe you know very obviously about his or her attitude and how the job has affected that, right? It's not to make excuses, but it is to understand. And I think that when in a lot of the things you covered already, right, whether it is operational systems that you utilize to improve your department, how they're doing or its efficiency, or whether you look at culture, like they're all intertwined. And I like to think that systems are absolutely necessary, but they help support the culture that you have, right? Whether it's the culture that you want or your desire you're moving toward, like systems don't make things just happen. Culture does, right? And that's where leadership and individual, um, I suppose, value brings that all to the table.
And I've talked. One of your guests that you've had is Andy McCurdy, who
Hmm.
I worked with at the sheriff's office, and
Yeah.
he has talked to me about this as well, and it's really key, I think, and I talk a lot with our chiefs and sheriffs about this. That, and again, having done that job for 17 years of my career, if it was writing memos and issuing policies, that would be easy, frankly.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think a lot of times we focus on that so much because it's something to get your arms around, but it has to be demonstrated and reinforced in a meaningful way. One of the things Andy has talked with me about, and it's really been impactful to me, is as we talk more, and when I say we, I mean chiefs and sheriffs, as we talk more about wellness and focusing on that and supporting that, we're not always demonstrating it. We're not always living it. We're not always, I would almost say living it ourselves.
Mm.
When an officer is working for a command staff or a chief or a sheriff who is saying one thing, doing another, and I've certainly been in that situation myself as a patrol officer. I mean, you see right through it. And getting beyond the checking the box is a huge part of that. If I can talk for a second about the sort of part of that evolution that I've seen again in this role, is we advocated for improved wellness resources for everyone across the state. And one of
Hmm.
the things I try to do in this job is there's lots of big, well-resourced agencies that are doing things really well because they have the resources and the money to do it. The majority of agencies in this state have 10 officers or fewer. And how do we make sure that we're taking care of everyone, the 11,000 officers in this state? And we did some surveys on wellness and how people were feeling. And I made this assumption that we just had to do the stuff we're doing better, the internal access to wellness or a counselor or being able to reach out at a specific time. The survey showed us two things. Number one, that the problem was worse than we thought. We
Mm.
had, our survey showed, and this is just in our state, 2% of officers had, I should say 7% of officers had suicidal ideations. 2% had taken specific concrete steps to act on that. And if you just run the numbers, that's a lot of people.
Hmm.
That raised the level of concern, which was good, I guess. But the other thing we learned was that the old, go see EAP, go see HR. I mean, we're way, way past that. That's not going to work. And I think that just the last few years, we've seen a real understanding of that way of thinking is not going to work anymore. And making sure that everybody in the state understands that, their police leader understands that.
Hmm.
And that, strangely enough, an arm's length, even in the form of an app, is actually appreciated in some ways. But then there also has to be something behind it.
Yeah.
And so having the arm's length of something like an app, which can sound really strange to somebody to say, you mean I'm going to go on my phone and
Mhm.
access help when I need it?
Yeah.
But for a lot of people, that arm's length is really important to that level of disconnect from the agency,
Mhm.
from anyone possibly knowing whether I'm accessing that or not, is super important to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And then again, not also just checking that box and saying, well, you have an app now and you can get help from this. Therefore, we're done. But then to also say, by the way, in addition to that, when it's more severe, when it's more significant, more long lasting, and you need the real support at that time in your life, we're there for you. And then to back it up in a meaningful way and to live it and to show that to people as a leader is, I've seen that in a lot of agencies, and we are working really, really hard to evangelize that, I guess is the way I would put it.
Yeah.
Daryl Lowe, the chief up in Redmond, is a strong believer in this, and many others. The amount of time that we're taking, chiefs and sheriffs, to talk about this has gone from 10% of our conversations just even 3-4 years ago to half now, because we realize how important this is to everything that we do if we want to do this job the right way.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of what you said there, I think, really paints the picture of the things that we're talking about so far, right? So, is it an app by itself? No, absolutely not. Is it a gym by itself? No. Is it a policy? No. It's like it's none of these things, but it's all of these things. So any of these things in combination with the care and people not knowing, it's kind of that, well, I don't know what to say. And sometimes you don't have to say anything. You just have to say, hey, I'm thinking about your hey, or ask the question, right? Hey, what is going to help you all do your job a little better? And then be ready for the response. And so, again, I think that just harkens back to like, what is it that we're trying to do? How do we build that supportive culture? There is no secret sauce. It's a combination of all things. And any of these things can be a tool, right? There's so much popularity in apps. It's just part of our lives now. And so we realize that there are pros and cons, but absolutely pros for there's anonymity. There's all this, like, no one has to know I'm using it. And in this digital age, I'm on my phone anyway, and I'm not going to wake anybody up, what have you, right? There are these different mechanisms that may attract people. And I think what I'm hearing you say earlier, whether it's, well, what about EAP, HR, and these other letters? Like, yeah, they have their place and they could be a part of the equation down the line, but we've had that, right? So if we want different results, we have to try a different method and be open to that. And it's not having all the answers in this formula, as you said earlier, right? Like, I don't have the formula either. That's a lot of what this project is bringing all these strong minds to spitball all this stuff, because I know not just what we are talking about, but what that's going to generate in someone else's mind on their commute to and from work or what have you, or working out. They're going to come up with a unique take on that for their own agency and their own culture.
Yeah. What you just said reminds me of something so quick story.
Yeah.
You use the phrase secret sauce, and it's kind of true. I became a police chief at a pretty young age at the department I started with. I was in the Midwest, and I was 38, I think, when I became a chief, and was now the chief of the people I had worked with. So I had to be brutally honest with people because they knew me. I knew where the bodies were buried, and I knew I knew everybody, and I'd worked with everyone. So
all the stories, right?
Yes. So there's this element of transparency where you also can't put on too much of a show of, I'm the new chief and look at my stars on my collar and aren't you impressed? It's like, no, this is Steve, who I worked with on Graveyard, 2 years ago. So I think that was a benefit to somewhat a benefit to me. I came to Kent just a little bit after that. And Kent was my first chief's job at a place where I hadn't worked before. And I came in and there was veteran chiefs all around at the time, really respected, very well-known chiefs who've been there a long time. And I guess the one thing, we all have this sort of imposter syndrome, when are they going to figure out I don't know what I'm doing? And what I did was I asked all the other chiefs, can we have breakfast once a month, no agenda, and just, for you all to, help me out. I mean, I'm just going to ask you straight up for help. This is a large agency that has a lot of issues, a lot of dynamics, as all those chiefs had. And can we sit down once a month, no agenda? And it was kind of cone of silence. It was, hey, I don't have to impress you. You don't have to impress me. Let me ask a question because I don't know what to do with this thing. Here's a political question or an employment question or disciplinary question. And what was fascinating to me is to see all those other chiefs go, I need this too. I mean, it was kind of like this, again, that sort of cone of silence where you get into a scenario where you can talk to people that you don't have to impress.
Yeah.
And you don't have to jump through any hoops, and you don't have to always play and, think in the back of your mind, am I saying something that might not be perceived the right way, like you do with public groups and people in elected office and everything else to deal with. That's an example of, my not understanding the dynamic probably helped because I was just willing to say, hey, I don't know. Can you help me with this?
Yeah.
And the mentorship that we developed was tremendous and still is to this day. And many years later, and it's a credit to the welcoming community and environment of Washington State. I mean, I was given the privilege of taking on this job of leading the Chiefs and Sheriffs Association, 8 years ago now. And even though I had, stepped off a plane some years before from another state, but every time we have a conference and every time we meet, I say, hey, I don't care what city, how big the city is, how big the county is, how important your job is, how small your city is. We're all here to learn from each other.
Mm-hmm.
Cone of silence. We're not here to impress each other. We're just trying to learn from each other and do this better. Because I don't care what agency you're from, you don't have it all figured out, because none of us do. And let's do better and work with each other to do that. And I cannot tell you how many times I've had chiefs and sheriffs say, that's exactly what I want to do. And I appreciate that so much. And as I say, I learned a lot of that attitude, that approach. Hopefully I brought a little bit of it to it as well. But again, seeing like the things that you're doing, I think is a great example of how we're all starting to get out of our corners a little bit and learning from each other and admitting that we don't know it all.
Yeah. No, that's huge. There's a few things I want to kind of draw out from that story because it hits different prongs that a lot of people tune in for these topics. One is that the mindset. And so a nod to your leadership ability, and not my boss, so I'm not sucking up. So, but in the mindset vein, right? Like you talked about becoming the senior executive leader, the chief at your agency in the Midwest, and everyone knew you. And you mentioned how that was a benefit because you're just going to be straight up because there's no other way to go. But not everyone does that. And so it was a benefit to you because you saw the benefit. And so that's what I'm nudging people listening in to glom onto, is that the benefit was that you saw it and you owned it and you took that strategy and it worked, right? Whereas you come in as the outsider and you have your own kind of imposter syndrome, as a lot of high achievers do. But then you're like, you know what? I just want to move past the noise and the ego and posturing. Like, I want to build a team. And how do you build a team? But you remove these barriers, you build this trust, you build this community. You go to breakfast and you literally say, hey, like, let's connect. I want to learn from you. I want to pick your brains. And then it happens for the whole group, right? I think a lot of kind of what I'm imagining is what I experienced. And I think that a lot of people probably have a version of this, but being a graveyard, like a young sergeant, where you're kind of hollering over the cubicle at the other sergeant and you bring up your FTO and you're like, you know what, this is a super complicated thing I've never had before. And you get all this positive, constructive kind of back and forth. Someone else calls someone else. And you're like, well, this is a fantastic question because none of us feel that great about, we don't know, but we're feeling really good about our answer as we keep spitballing. So I think that's a really good thing to recognize for those listening as we build leadership. And I'm a huge proponent of leadership at all levels because you are a leader. If you're a line officer, you're a leader as a case detective. And whether you promote or not, many of you will, but you're always leading in some way with those around you. But then the other thing is kind of that, what I'm hearing in that breakfast is like a literal peer support group, right? We talk about peer support as the entity and like the protected speech or privileged communication, but also like, I mean, I love, one of my bosses kind of, I suppose, like paraphrase definition of wellness is helping people do the job they want to do, the best they can do it, right? In the way that they want to do it, right? And that in that is nodding at this, awareness that they need to be supported and they need to be able to sustain, right? They need to be able to not burn out, all these things. But in that is almost like, what we talked about a little bit pre-recording start is that it gets lonelier at the top. And for those chiefs, those executive leaders, you're now, you're facilitating and you're organizing all of them, is that if they don't feel like there's anyone they can go to, they feel like they have to have all the answers and the buck stops with them, then what do they do with that angst, with that stress?
Yeah.
A lot of pressure.
And we are trying to build executive peer support for that very reason. And some of that more to do with, let's call it crisis peer support. But just that day-to-day, let me run this by you, is huge. And it's really easy to say. It's harder to do. It really is. You have to be pretty deliberate about it. As you're mentioning this, Eric, I'm thinking about a chief, and this was several years ago, who called me, and he was just agonizing about whether to terminate an officer over, as he talked it through with me, it was a pretty clear case of this person had to be terminated. He talked through the scenario with me and I said, well, this is my opinion, I'll support whatever you want, whatever you choose to do, but here's the ins and the outs and the outs. And I think people know this. I mean, no chief or sheriff terminates anyone or disciplines someone for I've had to terminate, just as this chief did, people that I really liked, people that I know have a family, people that, and this sounds like whining. I don't mean it to, but I mean, there's an element here of there's jobs that people have to do. Command staff is the same, where it's difficult to do, and to have somebody to be able to talk that through with is critical. And I'm going to shift over to the fact that the other thing I've seen and I just want to touch on this, is it's harder to find chiefs than it used to be. It just is. There's fewer people that want to do the job. It comes with, you're more at will. It's more, small p political.
Yeah.
It is a job that isn't as attractive to people as it used to be for a variety of reasons. And I think that people going into law enforcement has changed, I think, in many ways for the better. But that also doesn't necessarily lead them to wanting to promote to that part of their career. Whereas it used to be, well, of course you want to be a chief. That's what you do. Well, that's where you go. And a lot of people say, why would I do that? I'm not interested in that at all. So my point being that if we're going to make this a job that people can do, want to do, and we have the right people in this position because it's critical, we have to make sure that they're supported, and that all these things we're talking about in terms of building the organization that supports wellness, supports the right culture. We also have to make sure that it provides a level of stability and a level of support for the person doing the job. I've been amazed by the last, I'm going to say 5 years, certainly since George Floyd, how I've seen a real shift in people who are applying for or taking chief's jobs from away from people that were seeking it to people who simply accepted it because they felt that they were the right person and they were trying to serve the organization and serve the profession as opposed to their own careers. And they're doing out of a sense of almost of obligation as opposed to aspiration. And that's been a big change. But again, it has to do with, we have to give those folks the right support. Right before that would have been kind of the way that things I've seen a real change in people that are becoming police chiefs.
Yeah.
And it seemed to accelerate after George Floyd, where people becoming police chiefs because it was aspirational, because it was, you promote because, some of it was ego driven, and I'll admit that for myself. And it's shifted to much more of a sort of an obligation or an orientation towards service, where people say, I don't know that I want to be the chief, but I think I'm probably the right person for this department or for my department at this time. And they felt a sense of needing to step up. And that has been a shift. It's been a pretty visceral and significant shift in people stepping into the chief's role just in the last, like I said, about 5 years, which I think accentuates and underlines the need for those individuals to have that support, that ability to have a sort of an informal peer support and a more formal peer support, and to be able to come to people with the problems that are in the same position, but also who, again, they don't have to impress. They don't have to be too careful about what they have to say. And in the same way that's necessary for wellness for everyone, it is for chiefs and sheriffs as well.
Yeah, that's so interesting because I hadn't considered that, and I definitely don't see it as far as maybe my tenure or where I'm at, but it makes sense as I think more about it, right? Because I think with not just the times in general, but also the times with policing, you do see a heightened awareness and priority of wellness. And that looks a lot of different ways for different people. But I will speak for my peer group being like mid-level command staff. Generally, when we think about the chief, we think about a really difficult job, extremely high stress, probably a very tenuous attempt at work-life balance, right? And so if we are increasing this perception of or prioritization of wellness, to elevate is tough. But as you said it makes sense to me when I do see people, and I know people that continue to climb. A lot of times it is because they want to help, right? They're getting nudged and they're like, hey, why not? I'm gonna throw myself at it. We're gonna do our best, and my agency or my team or my community needs it. And I think that there are both, right? There are some that are, internally driven to grind and grow for sure. And I would like to think that I'm a little bit of both columns. But yeah, it does get tough. It is interesting to see or to hear your observations in that executive level over the last few years.
Yep. And again, I didn't start my journey that way. That's one of the things I've learned. And like I said, I keep learning. And, I again, starting almost 40 years ago, one of the things I would, you hear this from people sometimes, but I mean, I would do this again. I mean, I have been so fortunate to be able to do have the opportunities I've had. Like anything else, there's a lot of ups and downs along the way, tragedies along the way. the difficult things we see in this field, the things we experience. I mean, all of those are there. But I hope that you're like me, where through it all, it's like, man, I'm lucky to be doing this. I'm privileged to be able to be that person who's there. I think about, and it isn't the big calls necessarily. It isn't the most intense calls. You all know this, that it's those experiences with human beings that we deal with. Again, sometimes on their worst days, sometimes on their best days, and have the opportunity to do that. And then later as a chief and a sheriff, to be able to bring on really good people, to develop a culture as best you can, to leave some sort of legacy. That's unbelievably rewarding.
Yeah.
It's really challenging, but man, it's rewarding. And going back to what you said, for folks like yourself who are maybe in that command staff stage of your career, and you may be coming to that decision point in the future, should I look at heading up an agency? Should I look at that jump with the tenuousness that you mentioned? I guess my main message is, I'm hoping that I'm doing all I can do to provide the best support I can for folks who take that job on. We have much more to do, but we need really good people to do it. And I'm hoping in the future that people who are there for the right reasons will continue to do it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love that nudge to those that are coming up in their career, no matter what stage that is. But I also love the fact that you highlighted gratitude, and I am that way. I mean, certainly a ton of tough experiences, but I'm better for literally all of them. I'm a better person. I'm a better dad. I'm a better husband, better man, better like human being, because of what I was able to learn from those losses, from those hard times, even my mistakes,
Yes.
right? And so yeah, I
Sure.
wouldn't trade it for anything. And I think I feel very fortunate to have interacted in the role of recruiting recently, because if you're around a bunch of people that do want to do this job and aren't aware or accepting of the narratives that we, with cynical tendencies and a very exhaustive week to week, like, no blame, we get it. But it's just not as bad as we sometimes make it out to be. And I appreciate the role that WASPC takes on in that, and you leading that. So a little bit out of order, but I'm glad that this has come up a couple times. But I am curious, as far as your nearly 40 years, I think you just said, in policing, in the policing industry, give us a little crash course. People have heard little nuggets, but tell us about the progression there, and looking back, like, any huge surprises to
Sure.
what would be a young Steve in that progress.
So yeah, briefly, grew up in southern Minnesota, and I was in college, and I was in that, I don't know what I want to do. And I was thinking about going into actually communications.
Mm.
And I did an internship at a little radio station, and I would call police departments and sheriff's offices in the morning, find out what happened overnight so that I could give it to the news person. I wrote the news,
This is
unpaid
pre-Twitter,
internship.
pre-X.
Yeah, this was 1985, and I was 20. I found as the summer went on that I was more interested in the people I was talking to on the phone about what they were doing at law enforcement agencies than I was with going into journalism. And so at the end of the summer, we did a remote broadcast from the county fair, and the county sheriff was there, as sheriffs would do. They're walking around talking to people. And we did an interview, and I was the person who carried the equipment. And after it was done, I said, can I just talk to you a little bit? And that was one of the forks in the road, where I always think, be that guy, be that sheriff at that moment for me, because he could have easily said, I got other things to do. I have to go talk to people. I have to go talk to voters. But he took 20 minutes and talked to me about how I felt about where I was in my life, and maybe some interest in law enforcement. He said, come see me next week at my office. And I was hired on as a part-time jailer shortly thereafter, and everything came from that. And I finished college and started a suburban agency in Minnesota, eventually became the chief, was a legislator for a while. Had great opportunities, took the big jump to go to Kent PD. My wife said, you should apply for Kent PD. This is a part of the country we'd love to live. And I said, there's no way they would hire me. That's a really big agency, and they wouldn't even look seriously at me. And lo and behold, I was hired as a chief, and spent 5 great years at Kent. Hired Eric Tung, among others.
Shout out, yeah.
Went from there to the King County Sheriff's Office, was the under sheriff for Sue Rahr. I took over as the acting sheriff when she left. Ran for, but did not win a sheriff's race in 2012. Went to, and again, would do it again. It was great time to spend with King County Sheriff's Office. Went to Bremerton. After that, was the chief for 5 years, and then have been here for 8 years. And through it all, as you said, Eric, and it's lots of ups and downs. But holy smokes, do I have so much gratitude for all of it. I mean, the people that you work with and for, and I'm sorry, this isn't a war story. Can I just tell you one quick story?
You are a great storyteller. I welcome all the stories.
This is what I always think epitomizes it, is I was a young patrol officer in southern Minnesota, really cold in the wintertime there. And one morning I was working day shift, so I come in at like 6 a.m, incredibly cold. And I come in and there was a couple, two brothers that lived 2 doors away from each other in the downtown area of the town where I work. And the one every morning the one was 93, the other was 95. They were both widowers. The 93-year-old would go over to the 95-year-old's house every single morning, and they would have coffee together. And of course, this was also a way of them checking on each other. Mm-hmm. So his name was Mr. Pranky. I still remember his name. Mr. Pranky went to check in with his brother, and the other brother had gotten up that morning. He made his pot of coffee, he put it on, he turned the coffee pot maker on, sat in his lazy boy, and he passed away. Right there. By the way, not a bad way to go. Yeah. 95 years old, lazy boy. I'm making coffee.
Smelling the coffee,
So his brother comes over, lets him in, and of course he finds his brother passed away in the lazy boy, so he calls the police as he's supposed to do. I go down there and the firefighters come down and they make sure he's passed away. And they all leave. And so I had to wait for the medical examiner, that's how it worked, mm-hmm. which was like an hour, with Mr. Pranky and his deceased brother who's in the lazy boy for an hour. And when I describe that, people would think, well, that must have been awkward and that must have been difficult. And, what a tough part of that job. But Mr. Pranky says to me, well, be ashamed to let that coffee go to waste. Mm-hmm. So he said, let's have our, so we sat at this table and had coffee and talked about, and he told me these stories about him and his brother, some of which were pretty raunchy.
Sure.
But I think about this and I remember it like it was yesterday, because it was the privilege of being there for this guy, for that human being at that time in his life. And I still get a little choked up about it because it epitomizes what I admire about what law enforcement does. They're there for people when they need them in different ways, sometimes intense, sometimes like this, having coffee with a 95-year-old, talking to him about his brother who's 93, that's kind of what it's all about. And I think about the fact that, I was able to be there at that time for that person. And we all have done those things 1,000 times. And everybody who listens to this is saying, I can give you dozens of examples of the thing you just talked about. I have so much gratitude for that. And it's why I care about this stuff and why I'm so glad that you're doing the work that you're doing, Eric.
No, thank you. And in that, it goes back to mindset, because there are probably plenty of cops that would be like, no, that is an intense scene. And I do get nervous thinking about going to that call. I'll go to 3 shootings before that call. But all to say, it's all important stuff. It's all people helping people.
Yes.
And even you talking about your entry into law enforcement, meeting with the sheriff and your sheriff at the time giving you the time. It's that nudge that everyone is a recruiter. Everyone is modeling this profession. And if you think that call is going to be uncomfortable and awkward, then it absolutely will be. If you think that you're not going to be a great spokesperson for policing because you're burned out, then you're right. And you will not be. But if you recognize, as so many do, how many people have come on this show, how many people I've talked to in recruiting that get picked up, right? It's, why do they want to be a cop? Why do all these active cops or these retired cops, why did they want to be a cop? It usually comes back to seeing an example. It might be Cops, the show. It might be that cop that was at my school. It might be that cop that came down my street. It's those little tiny nudges and those little interactions that create this idea that, hey, I think I could be that, or I want to be that, or I'm going to be that. And so there are no small moments, only what we make small and insignificant. But certainly I love that. And I would wager, because you do have this focus on gratitude and recognizing those little moments, those big moments, truly, is probably why you're continuing on this career with such enthusiasm, engagement, paying it forward, certainly. For those that are outside of the region, could you tell a little bit, maybe in closing, about like what it is you do, what WASPC is, and you as the executive director, what you look at your role as? And I wager that whatever you say would be a great way for people to think about their own interaction with leadership and how they can take nuggets of that.
So WASPC is the acronym, the Sheriffs and Chiefs, Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs. So we've been around since 1963, based in Lacey, and we do legislative work. We have, the the folks that are doing work in Olympia. In fact, as we speak right now, working on the police funding bill to try to get additional support for staffing. So we do a lot of legislative work, but we also run a lot of state programs, jail booking system, the sex offender websites, a lot of mental health field response grants that go out for navigator teams all around the state are run by WASPC. All of the crime stats in our state, that's part of what we manage. So I think we have 26 employees, I think it's about a $26 million budget every 2 years. And again, as you mentioned, Eric, one of the reasons I enjoy this job so much and appreciated it so much is I work with the roughly 300 chiefs and sheriffs around the state and can continue to carry that message of how can we help each other? How can we all improve the service of public safety in our state and support those folks, our teams that are out there every day? And going back to the 17 years that I was a chief or a sheriff, and it seems weird to say 17 years I had the honor to be a chief or a sheriff. But going back to that, I so respect the people who do the job, the people who take calls, the people who supervise them, the people that lead, in the corner office. It is rewarding. It is difficult. Again, as we've been talking about, we're supporting each other better. I think this is one more way that I can provide that support. And you're right. I have probably, if you would have told me I would still be doing this 40 years later, I would say, wow, I'm kind of surprised. But it's because I have found it to be rewarding and valuable. And I hope that we can continue to be rewarding and valuable. But I also would have said 40 years ago, starting this job, that if you would have told me the opportunities, the moments, the growth, all the things I've been able to do, I would say, wow, that's beyond my wildest dreams. And in many ways, it has been. So for those of you that are doing the job now and are thinking about starting or just starting up or mid-career, I am not a hard-bitten veteran going, oh yeah, everything sucks now. It doesn't. I mean, we have our challenges. We always will. We'll power through it. And I feel strongly that this profession is getting better, rapidly better. Yeah. And it's getting better because people are paying attention to it. People are paying attention to their role in it. And that's where this change is going to come from. I want to encourage folks. I think this is a great time to be in law enforcement.
Yeah. Absolutely. It goes back to the mindset, right? If you believe that our golden years are past and they'll never return, then you will be correct, right? Everyone that works around you might be experiencing a very different paradigm, but you will absolutely create that for yourself.
And as somebody who, I worked with officers that started in the 60s when I first started, and they would talk about the good old days, and they were not the good old days. These are the good old days.
Yeah. Yeah. We got to make them that.
Yep.
Well, sir, I appreciate so much your time and sharing insights from your own career, but also the state of law enforcement. Anything else that you'd like to leave the listeners with, and any nudge to, WASPC and how people can get involved with that?
Well, just, like I said, the one thing I would mention, particularly to those listeners that you have that are looking at potential leadership positions in the future, I'm just going to say this as loudly and clearly as I can. We need chiefs. We need good chiefs. We need chiefs that are there for the right reasons. And I'm going to make my personal offer to anyone, as I do to any of our WASPC members, which is if you choose to take on a leadership position, whether it be a chief, whether it be sheriff, whether it be command staff, I love this part of the job. I will always be there for you. I'll always give you my cell phone number. When I retire, I'm still going to have this cell phone number. I can be a sounding board. I don't have the answers, but I'm there to help. That's the part of this job that I have a real passion for, is making sure that I can do all I can to support people taking on some of those difficult positions. So that's why we're here, and that's why we'll continue to be here.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, sir.
You bet. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.